What's going on? I just wanted to make a quick video on a question that somebody gave to me about actually what I would do when I was 20 years old about saving money and making more money or being in a better position today than what I am, which is fairly good because of things that I learned at an earlier age. So in this video, I'm going to teach you or express two things that I learned when I was a little bit older, probably in my mid 30s or whatnot. And I think I actually heard this from or heard this repeated by Grant Cardone. So it's the principle of being able to live off of less. And so what I mean by that is it's really the 40-40-20 rule, right? 40% of your income is going to go towards taxes. 40% of your income should actually go towards savings, and you should live off of 20% of your income. So let's break that down in the sense of making, let's just say, average person's, let's just use 10 grand, making simple math, right? 10 grand a month person sitting there saying, I make 10 grand a month. So 40% of that is actually going to go in taxes, which is fairly accurate. So I think it's probably about 35% tax bracket that you'll fall into, depending on your state and your state taxes that's included. So outside of that, you'll look at the other 40%. So now I'm going to be able to save 4 grand a month. If you save 4 grand a month out of that equation, and we're talking about net revenue, not top line gross, right? If we're talking about saving 4 grand a month, in a year, you're almost to 50K. All right. And so that's one element. So then let's talk about your living and living off of 20%, which would be the 2K a month. Now, is that reasonable? Yeah, it's reasonable. Is it going to be rough? Yeah, it's going to be rough. Why? Because unless you're 20 years old, 25, 26, I bought my first house when I was 28, and I think my mortgage alone was $1,700 at that point. So you're looking at that and you say, okay, what's a good way for me to actually reduce costs? Well, typically in your early 20s, you can do something you can leverage the asset by allowing other people to live with you. And what I mean by that is you could pay rent at somebody else's house if you haven't bought a house, or you can do like I did, which was have roommates move into your house and help you pay off the mortgage, which is another whole conversation that we can have. So looking at that 20%, if we have, let's say, one or two other people move in and significantly reduce a $2,000 rent or mortgage payment, now we're at $1,000. So now let's look at it. It's like, what else do we have? Well, I'm sure you're going to have a car payment. Let's say you have a fairly okay car and it's going to cost you $300 a month. Okay, that's cool. 300, let's say 350, and then let's add another $100 for insurance. So now you're at 450 on that. So brings our total up to about 1450. We still have to eat and be able to go out and all that other stuff, right? So, it's $600 a month for groceries, reasonable. Yeah, and we're not talking about the Netflix or anything else that you're going to add, going out, having a beer, going out with dinner. So here's the point, right? $2,000 is going to be very uncomfortable. So how do you get past that? Well, the reality is you have to sit there and say, okay, well, what else can I do to generate another $1,000 a month for my living situation, right? So unconsciously, if you're making this money and you set there aside and say, okay, I know I'm going to go pay this in taxes. I know I'm going to save this to myself, right? Why am I paying the tax man first? Notice this, guys. You pay the tax man before you get paid, right? The U.S. system says, give me my money before I give it to you. You just earned it. So think about that, right? And they are typically making or saving more money at the end of the year than you have. The system is designed for you to fail unless you apply something like this very early on. So I want to make sure that this point is getting across because it's a simple system that you can use and leverage every single day by just doing the basics. 40% is going to go to the government. 40% I'm going to actually save and look at investment later when we get to that conversation. But we're just going to say we're saving that, right? And then 20% we're going to live off of instead of, spending everything we make. I have a good friend of mine who's very frugal that has essentially had the same job since college or since we graduated college. And he lives a simple life, but he's traveled all over the world. He has 2 cars. They're both paid off, plays golf with me frequently, travels, he's pretty close to having his house paid off that he bought right after college. And he said something that was, that stuck with me for a number of years. And it was simply this: most people, when they make more money, they tend to spend more money. And there's no reason for it. There's absolutely me and him. I remember when him and I were in college, we used to live off $20 a week for food, right? So we had our food, we had our education paid for, we had our dorms paid for, and we have, during the summertime, I remember we know McDonald's, all the fast food joints that were, I'd never probably want to do right now, but we lived off of all the specials because we knew where all the specials were right by the college every single week. And it cost us about $20, a week to live off of. Now, could you do that? Yeah. Now, yeah, it probably wouldn't be healthy. You probably be eating top ramen and so forth, but you can manage. So my point is this: like, just because you go and get, a new raise or a new amount of money, go from a 60K job to a 100K job, or you go from your agency that's you're making 10 grand a month to 50 grand a month that you're actually paying yourself, not top line revenue that's coming in. You don't have to go and say, okay, now I'm going to go buy that Lambo. That's a whole nother conversation, but 9 times out of 10, it doesn't even make sense. You're just blowing money away. You might as well drive down the street with the top off of it and just burn money as you drive down the Pacific Coast Highway, right? So going back to the 40-40-20 rule as I'm ranting, 40% in taxes, 40% in savings, 20% in living, right? And if you're uncomfortable with that 20%, just means you got to make more. That's it. It's going to push you, right? Your financial thermostat is going to have to go up because you're uncomfortable in that segment, right? Here's the other thing. At the end of the year, now you actually have money to go and invest on a good accountant that's going to be able, and I say this not at the end of the year, but during the year, you're going to do this so you can position yourself to legally gain back some of that clawback, some of that 40% that you were saving for the tax man, right? So the U.S. government now that is taking or getting 40%, let's lower that. Number one, it's probably going to be less than 40% right off the bat. But if you invest in a good accountant, what you're able to do is get your taxable income reduced even more, right? So now let's say we can get it reduced by 10%. So now we take it from 40 to 30. That's another 10% of what you just made, which can now go back into savings, right? Of which we're going to talk about how we multiply that later on. So if that makes sense, that's just something that I would tell my 20-year-old version self that, when you start making, 10, 20K a month or whatever the case may be in your 20s, start thinking about how you can leverage that capital to do things later on for when you're later on in your 20s or your early 30s, and you can start making big moves, right? So now you can start buying multiple properties. You might be able to buy your first apartment complex. You might be able, to invest heavily in, stocks. I remember this is one thing that happened to me was I ended up buying a new house, spent 20K on new furniture, big TVs, all that other stuff in my first house ever. And Google went public at, I think it was like a little over $100 a share. And I contemplated at that time, should I spend 20K on the furniture or should I buy $20,000 in stock with Google? I told you what I did. You can ask me down below in the comments how much that cost me, or better yet, why doesn't somebody actually figure out what the actual cost of that $20,000 investment would look like today if it was still in that stock. Okay. Other than that, I hope you guys liked and enjoyed this video and got some value out of it. Again, remember the 40-40-20 rule, just simple, mindset. If you're in your 20s, or if I was telling my 20-year-old self, that would be the thing that I would follow as I go through my early 20s and watch everybody else waste and spend their money while I actually build a net worth to be able to allow me to make bigger moves in my 30s. So outside of that, like I said, subscribe below, join the Facebook community where I share little strategies and tactics like this, or how to scale your agency. Other than that, I will talk to you in the next video. Take care.